March 11th, 2011, a date forever etched into the collective memory of Japan. What began as an ordinary day quickly transformed into a scene of unimaginable horror. A massive earthquake struck off the northeastern coast, triggering a tsunami that swept across the land with relentless force. Entire towns were swallowed by the sea, and thousands of lives were lost in a matter of minutes. The survivors were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, haunted not only by the devastation they had witnessed, but by something far more chilling. In the wake of this catastrophe, as the waters receded and the rebuilding began, stories emerged, stories of ghostly apparitions, of spirits that seemed unable to find peace. Were these lost souls seeking closure, or were they remnants of a tragedy too great to comprehend? Join us as we delve into the haunting aftermath of the 2011 Japan Tsunami, where the line between the living and the dead seemed to blur.
Emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. Stay tuned for further instructions. This is not a test.
The day dawned like any other, with the promise of spring in the air. But beneath the surface of the earth, a force was gathering, a force that would soon unleash unimaginable destruction. At 2:46 p.m., the ground began to shake with a ferocity that sent buildings crumbling and people scrambling for safety. This was no ordinary earthquake. The tremors were so powerful that they were felt across the entire country. But the true horror was yet to come. In the moments following the quake, the ocean began to rise, pulling back from the shore before surging forward in a towering wall of water. The tsunami raced inland, consuming everything in its path. Cars were tossed like toys, homes were reduced to splinters, and lives were lost in the blink of an eye. The landscape was forever altered, transformed into a wasteland of debris and sorrow. For those who survived, the memories of that day would be seared into their minds. The sight of the ocean swallowing their world, the cries of those who could not be saved, and the overwhelming sense of helplessness as nature's fury was unleashed. In the weeks and months that followed the tsunami, as the survivors began the arduous task of rebuilding, something strange began to happen. People across the affected regions started reporting encounters with the supernatural. These were not mere whispers of folklore or tales passed down through generations. They were first-hand accounts, shared by those who had lived through the disaster. Ghostly figures were seen wandering the streets at night, lost souls, it seemed, searching for something or someone. Others spoke of unexplained noises in the ruins of homes, of cold drafts in rooms where no windows were open, and of the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. These encounters were not limited to a single town or village. They were widespread, and they could not be ignored. What were these spirits trying to communicate? Were they trapped between worlds, unable to move on? Or were they a manifestation of the collective grief and trauma that hung over the land like a dark cloud? As the story spread, so too did the fear that the dead were not at rest, and that their presence would linger until their stories were told. Among the most unsettling of these encounters were the stories told by taxi drivers in the coastal towns. These were men and women who had spent years driving the same routes, familiar with every street and alley. But in the aftermath of the tsunami, their routines were shattered by something beyond their understanding. Kenji Sato was driving late one night when he picked up a passenger, a young woman, drenched and shivering, who asked to be taken to a nearby neighborhood. The ride was silent, save for the sound of rain tapping against the windows. But when Kenji arrived at the destination and turned to ask for the fare, the back seat was empty. The woman had vanished, leaving only a puddle of water where she had sat. Similar stories were recounted by other drivers, like Hiroshi Takahashi, who was directed to an address only to find it no longer existed, washed away by the tsunami. And then there was Naoko Tanaka, who drove a passenger to the seaside only to realize upon arrival that no one was there. These ghostly passengers were said to be the spirits of those who had perished in the waves, still trying to return home, unaware that their lives had ended. The drivers were left shaken, unable to explain what they had experienced, but certain that they had encountered something not of this world. The rescuers who ventured into the wreckage in the days after the tsunami were hailed as heroes, risking their lives to search for survivors. But many of them returned with stories that chilled the blood. Yuki Nakamura, a seasoned firefighter, spoke of an experience he could not easily forget. As he navigated through the rubble of a collapsed building, he felt a sudden chill, as if the temperature had dropped. He looked up and saw, just for a moment, the figure of a woman standing among the debris. She was pale, her clothes torn, and she seemed to be reaching out for help. Yuki rushed toward her, but as he did, she vanished. He found nothing but ruins where she had stood. Similar tales were told by others, like Aiko Suzuki, a volunteer who felt the presence of a child as she dug through the ruins of a school. She described the sensation as unmistakable. A tug on her sleeve, a soft whisper in her ear, urging her to keep searching. These spirits, it seemed, were not malevolent. They were desperate, longing to be found, to be acknowledged. For the rescue workers, these encounters were a stark reminder of the lives lost and of the souls still wandering in search of peace. For those who managed to return to their homes, the nightmare was far from over. Families across the affected regions reported strange occurrences, events that defied explanation and left them living in fear. The Yamamoto family was among the first to speak out. They described how, in the weeks following the disaster, their home was plagued by unexplained phenomena. Doors would creak open on their own, lights would flicker despite being turned off, and at night, they would hear footsteps echoing through the empty halls. It was as if the house had a life of its own, a presence that could not be ignored. The Fujimura family experienced something even more unsettling. They would see figures in the shadows, ghostly apparitions that would appear behind them, reflected in mirrors or in the corners of their vision. These figures were silent, watching, but their presence was undeniable. And then there were Masaru and Yuki Tanabe, who spoke of nights when they would wake to find ghostly figures standing at the foot of their bed. These spirits, they believed, were the souls of those who had died in the disaster, unable to move on, drawn to the warmth and life of the homes they had once known. These hauntings were a constant reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded, of the lives that had been cut short, and of the spirits that still lingered, trapped between worlds. One of the most eerie and unsettling phenomena to emerge in the aftermath of the tsunami were the reports of mysterious phone calls. In towns where entire neighborhoods had been destroyed, phones began to ring in houses that were now nothing but debris. Those who answered described hearing faint voices on the other end, voices that seemed distant, almost otherworldly. In some cases, the callers claimed to be loved ones who had perished in the disaster, asking to be picked up or inquiring about the safety of others. These calls would often end abruptly, leaving the recipients with a deep sense of unease. There were also instances where survivors received calls from numbers they recognized, friends, family members. But when they answered, there was only silence, or worse, a static noise that seemed to carry with it a feeling of profound sorrow. The most chilling aspect of these calls was that the phone lines in many of these areas had been destroyed, making it impossible for them to have been made through normal means. Were these the final attempts of spirits to reach out to their loved ones, unable to accept that they were no longer among the living? Or were they echoes of the past, residual energy trapped in the remnants of a life that had been violently cut short? Whatever the explanation, these phone calls added another layer of mystery to an already incomprehensible tragedy. Even the places once filled with laughter and life, schools, community centers, public buildings, became sites of ghostly encounters. Haruto Yamashita, a teacher who survived the tsunami, recounted an experience that shook him to his core. One evening, as he walked through the empty halls of his school, he began to hear faint whispers and the soft patter of footsteps, as if children were still present, even though the building was deserted. Turning a corner, he glimpsed what seemed to be a group of children at the end of the hallway. But when he blinked, they were gone, leaving only silence and the fading light. Similar stories emerged from volunteers in community centers for survivors. They spoke of moving shadows, doors that creaked open and shut without explanation, and the unsettling feeling that they were never truly alone, even in the dead of night. These once vibrant public spaces had become conduits for the spirits of those lost, their energy lingering in the places where they had found joy and comfort. The apparitions were not malevolent, but their presence was a constant reminder of lives abruptly ended and futures never realized. In Japan, temples and shrines are places of peace and spiritual reflection, where the living seek solace and the dead are honored through ancient rituals. But after the tsunami, even these sacred spaces were not spared from hauntings. Monks devoted to the spiritual well-being of their communities found themselves confronted with the very souls they sought to guide. In the stillness of the night, performing rituals to honor the dead, they glimpsed figures in the shadows, spirits seeking solace, unable to find peace. These apparitions often appeared during ceremonies, standing silently at the edge of gatherings as monks chanted prayers for their eternal rest. Reverend Taio Kaneta, a respected spiritual leader, spoke of the overwhelming sorrow that filled the shrine he had cared for over many years, as if the very walls were weeping for lost souls. One night, alone in the candlelit sanctuary, he felt a presence beside him, a coldness that was both unsettling and profoundly sad. When he turned, no one was there, but the feeling lingered, as if the spirit was waiting for something, perhaps the words that would set it free. These encounters deeply affected the monks and reverends, who realized their role had expanded beyond comforting the living. They were now tasked with helping the dead find their way to the afterlife, bringing closure to a tragedy that had shaken their faith. To understand the haunting stories that emerged after the tsunami, one must delve into Japanese spiritual beliefs and cultural practices. In Japan, the boundary between the living and the dead is not seen as impenetrable, but as a veil that can be crossed, especially in times of great sorrow. The concept of yurei, or ghosts, is deeply rooted in Japanese folklore, spirits that linger due to unresolved emotions or unfinished business. These yurei often remain in places where they met their end or where they have strong emotional ties. The tsunami's sudden and violent destruction created ideal conditions for such spirits to manifest. Survivors connected to their cultural heritage did not dismiss these encounters as mere imagination. Instead, they saw them as a continuation of the relationship between the living and the dead, a sign that the spirits were still present, seeking resolution. Traditional rituals like Obon, a festival honoring ancestral spirits, took on new significance after the disaster. The living sought to honor and appease the spirits through offerings, prayers, and memorials, hoping to guide them to the afterlife and bring them peace.
The ritual which our story is based on is still practiced in a fishing community in Tokushima. Those who have lost a family member within the past year gather at the port. This straw doll is said to act as a magnet for the souls of the departed. People believe that facing the sea and calling out the names of the dead will bring their souls back to this world. On the first day of Obon, small fires are lit at the entrances to homes. This is done to help the ancestral spirits find their way home. During the Obon period, there's a tradition to make cucumber horses and aubergine oxen. This is based on the desire for the ancestors to come to visit as fast as possible riding on horses, but to leave as slowly as possible riding on oxen. A special table is set up for the spirits, and offerings of food and drink are placed on it. It's customary to treat the spirits as if they were still alive.
In this way, the stories of hauntings were not just tales of the supernatural. They were a reflection of the deep cultural and spiritual beliefs that permeate Japanese society. A reminder that even in death, the bonds between loved ones remain unbroken. As stories of hauntings spread, so did efforts to bring peace to troubled spirits and comfort to the living. Spiritual leaders like Reverend Taio Kaneta took on the responsibility of helping both worlds find closure. Along with other monks and priests, he performed rituals to guide spirits to the afterlife, visiting homes where hauntings were reported, blessing the spaces, and offering prayers. These rituals were deeply rooted in the belief that spirits needed help to move on. Reverend Kaneta often comforted survivors, explaining that the spirits were not angry but lost, seeking help to find their way. Many felt relief as the spirits found peace, but Reverend Kaneta knew healing would take time. The memories of the disaster were still fresh, the wounds deep, and the spirit's presence would linger until the last soul found its way home. His work was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of compassion and faith. The 2011 Japan tsunami was a disaster of unprecedented scale, leaving a profound mark on the nation. The physical destruction was immense, but the emotional and spiritual toll was perhaps even greater. The ghostly encounters that followed are more than just supernatural tales. They reflect deep grief, unresolved sorrow, and the enduring connection between the living and the dead. As Japan rebuilds, the memories of that day remain etched in the hearts of those who lived through it. The spirits may no longer wander the streets, but their presence is felt in quiet moments, in the collective memory of a nation that endured immense tragedy. These hauntings help the living process grief, find meaning in chaos, and honor those taken too soon. They remind us that the bonds between the living and the dead are never truly severed. As time passes and wounds heal, the spirits may find peace, but their stories will be told for generations, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit.